That's very powerful, and it speaks to us at many levels. We find this in Mark chapter 6:34. And Jesus, when he came out, saw a great multitude and was moved with compassion for them. We read there were 5,000 men besides women and children. And he saw them, and they'd come to listen to Jesus. They'd heard the miracles, and they were lost, like a sheep without a shepherd. And we read in Scripture where Jesus began to teach them many things. And as the day progressed, we read the story, picking it up in verse 35. And when it grew late, his disciples came and said to Jesus, "This is a desolate place, and the hour is now late. Send them away to go into the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat." Now this is the Jesus who saw the crowd compassionate. And these are the disciples who don't quite have that same compassion and saying, well, look, they're hungry. Leave them to their own devices. And you know what Jesus said to them? You give them something to eat. And I can imagine the disciples thinking, well, there's nothing around here with what? Except a little boy with some lunch or some fish and some bread. But Jesus said, you give them something to eat. See, the disciples were like us sometimes, very practical. The people are hungry. Well, they can go and fend for themselves. They're big. They've got families. There's too many of us. We can't do that. And mind you, it was. Scripture says there were 5,000. They counted by 5,000 men of those days. But it was a bigger crowd than that. And they were hungry. And they were in a desolate place. So the disciples' natural impulse was to send the people away. But Jesus' natural impulse was say, no, you take responsibility for the circumstance and you minister in their lives, you feed them. And the miracle of Jesus then taking the boy's lunch, blessing it, giving thanks to God, passing it to his disciples, and feeding the multitude, where at the end, or lying on the ground, they collected the waste, and there were 12 full baskets of crumbs. And the miracle wasn't lost. We are called to meet people's needs and take an active part in them, no matter how impossible the circumstance looks. There's a second principle that comes with that. Whatever Jesus Christ asks of us, he will always provide the resources for us to minister with, because we do it in his name, by his power. That is very comforting. It's also very empowering, but it's also daunting when you meet circumstances in our lives that seem like out of our control. How do you feed 5,000 plus people on the lunch of a small boy? With man, it's impossible. But with God, Jesus said, all things are possible. And we are called to live in the realm of God, not on human materialism where we're limited by finite math. Isn't that encouraging and empowering? And it calls all of us to begin to step up, no matter how difficult the circumstances. Today we are surrounded in our society by masses of desolate, vulnerable, hungry people. What are you going to do about it?